Hello and welcome to the opening session for day two of the 10th annual UAGC Teaching and Learning Conference. My name is Haley Sampson and I serve UAGC as the co-chair of the UAGC Teaching and Learning Conference and as the Associate Director of Faculty Engagement in the Faculty Affairs Department. This second day of the Teaching and Learning Conference, or as we call it, TLC, is designed to investigate the impact artificial intelligence is having on belonging in higher education. I am thrilled to introduce the panel chair, Dr. Nathan Pritz, professor and program chair for the first year writing at the University of Arizona Global Campus. Nate is a leader in higher education, specializing in faculty development, instructional innovation, and the integration of emerging technologies in teaching and learning. His initiatives have focused on online learning technologies, faculty training, as well as scalable interventions to support faculty and student in digital environments. Joining Dr. Pritz is Dr. Rebecca Hines, head of the Work Innovation Lab by Asana. The Work Innovation Lab is focused on human-centered research to deliver actionable insights that support organizational evolution. Dr. Hines conducts research on organizational transformation through AI and hybrid work and has published in the Harvard Business Review, the New York Times, and the Wall Street Journal. Finally, completing the panel today, please welcome Dr. Zoe Johnson, assistant professor at the University of St. Gallen, who researches emotions and human technology collaboration, aiming to enhance well-being and effectiveness in tech-driven work environments. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you, Haley. So how is AI affecting education? It's probably not, right? I think we can just call the panel off today. I think we're set. We're good. No, I'm super excited to have you all join us today, to have Zoe and Rebecca here to chat about this. Uh, I was sharing this earlier. We've been planning this panel for 6 or 7 months at this point, and when I first wrote to both of them, they were on my very short wish list of people to participate. I was just shocked they both wrote back. So I'm just really excited they're here to share their insights with us today. They both represent, I think, connected perspectives, but they have different, they sort of come at things from different ways. And I think it's going to be a really interesting mix to have them share some ideas with us. So AI seems to be reshaping everything, from the way our students learn to how we as educators engage with them. Today, as we look at the role of AI in education, I want to start by acknowledging some of the real concerns that we all share. AI is often seen as a disruptor, not only to our roles as educators, but to the entire educational process. Anyone grade papers today? It challenges longstanding practices around how students acquire knowledge, how they learn, and even how we assess their growth. But while these are valid concerns, I'd like to suggest that the antidote isn't to ban AI from our classrooms. Instead, it's about mindfully integrating it and teaching our students how to use it in ways that enhance, but not replace, their learning. In my own experience and in some of the research I've done, I've come to see AI not as a threat, but as a partner that, yes, can provide feedback and generate ideas, but still can't replicate the deeply personal, distinctly human aspects of teaching, the empathy, intuition, and encouragement that make students truly feel seen and heard, and that lead to the sense of belonging that we're here to talk about today. This uniquely human touch, what I refer to as a conspicuously human presence, is something AI just can't hack. In my experience, when we approach AI thoughtfully, it can actually reinforce the most human elements of education. AI can handle repetitive tasks, can assist in generating ideas, and even provide basic feedback themes, freeing us as educators to focus on what truly matters, the complex relational work that helps students feel seen and valued. But it's up to us to also guide students in using AI purposefully. By teaching them how to engage critically with these tools, we empower them to become not just consumers of information, but active participants in their own learning. So what remains irreplaceable is our ability to bring a distinctly human touch to our teaching. AI might help a student outline an argument or refine their grammar, but it can't replicate the insights, intuition, and encouragement that we bring as educators. These are our handprints in the classroom, the mark we leave on our students' learning journeys, and that can't be automated. If we lean into these strengths, AI becomes not a threat, but a tool that enables us to make an even greater impact. For example, in my own teaching, I've started using video feedback, showing students my real-time reactions, the way I respond to their ideas, the moments where they've sparked something new or need further guidance, just as a way to ensure that my unique handprints are on that element of the class. They see my face, hear my voice, and feel my investment in their growth. This isn't a way to necessarily ban AI. It's just a way to make sure that people see me invested in their growth in the classroom. Finding ways to do that, to continuously do that, I think are one of the ways that we can work around and with AI in the classroom. As we discuss all these challenges and changes today, I want us to remember that our role as educators is not only to impart knowledge, but to embody the very qualities that AI doesn't have: our empathy, our adaptability, and our capacity for meaningful human engagement. In a world where AI can now simulate feedback and even anticipate student needs, what makes us as educators irreplaceable in the journey of creating student belonging in the classroom is our ability to create those handprints, the distinctly human moments we bring. When we talk about engagement, I'm not talking about something that's measured by clicks or open rates. It's only about showing students that their work matters, that they're seen and heard, and no algorithm can replicate that. So today, we're going to hear from two amazing speakers, researchers, practitioners, looking at AI through some of the same lenses that matter to us in higher education, but with additional insights that I think can help fuel our work in some new directions. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Rebecca Hines. Rebecca, I know you've got a great presentation here. I wonder if for a quick second you might just say a little bit about your position for people who might not be familiar with Asana. My wife works in healthcare. They use Asana for everything. And so just to kind of fill that in a little bit.
Sure. Hi, everyone. It's so nice to be here. So I'm Rebecca. I lead our work innovation lab at Asana. So Asana is a collaborative work management platform that helps teams work smarter together. So connecting individual tasks to teamwork all the way up to strategy and execution, tasks to goals. And then the Work Innovation Lab is our internal think tank at Asana. So we conduct research related to the future of work. Not surprisingly, AI has been a major focus of our research over the past couple years. I recently finished my academic career and went through the process and was quite frustrated by the disconnect between the great research I was reading about and in some cases producing, and then what was happening on the ground in practice in actual organizations. And so our team is really passionate about trying to bridge that gap. We work very closely with about 24 different professors from all across the world to conduct our research. And we really think that that is important, and a key part of the future of work is bridging that disconnect between academia and industry and trying to distill academically rigorous research into a digestible way for executives in particular, but broadly workers and leaders in their organizations as well. So I have a presentation I will pull up on the slides here, and let me know if you can see the slides. Great. So this study that I'm going to walk through today is one that we published this summer in collaboration with Anthropic. And the motivation for this study was we really wanted to understand how AI is being adopted in organizations, what's working well, where are their challenges, and most important, what are the companies that are getting AI right and getting results with AI, getting great adoption of AI within their organizations, doing differently from the ones that aren't getting those results? And so today what we've done is we've cut the data specific to the education sector. I thought that was going to be most relevant for the audience today. I'll give some overview in terms of benchmarks across industry, but really focusing specifically on the education sector. So in terms of the sample, we surveyed 5,000 knowledge workers. This was in the US and UK. And so one of the first things we saw and we've been tracking over the past couple years is this massive growth in the adoption of AI within our organization. So right now we see about half of workers already using AI each week. Now it's slightly lower in the education sector than it is in other industries, but it's also increasing at a faster rate, which is interesting as well. So 47% of knowledge workers within the education sector are using generative AI each week, and it's a 57% increase in a 47% increase in just the past 9 months, so slightly higher than the 44% increase we see across the board. Now, while we see that great adoption within our organizations, we also see this massive gap, sometimes called an ambition execution gap. So there's a lot of ambition around AI, a lot of hype around AI, but when we actually look at the organizations that are getting results from that AI, it's very few. So 7% of employees actually say their organizations have mature AI implementations, meaning they've implemented AI into multiple different use cases, and they're actually reviewing the impact and success of these tools. And so part of the motivation for this study was to understand, how can we move from great ambition to great execution? And through our research, we found that organizations have various levels of AI maturity right now. And the ones that are less mature are thinking about AI and implementing it in fundamentally different ways than the most mature organizations. All of these companies and organizations have users of AI within their walls, and yet they're thinking about and acting on the technology in fundamentally different ways. And so the natural question that we really wanted to dig into in this study is, what separates those stage 1, those more mature organizations, from the stage 5 organizations? And we've seen that it boils down to a few different dimensions. In the report, we outlined 5 different dimensions. We call these the 5 C's. And what our research shows is those stage 1 companies differ quite significantly across all of these different dimensions compared to the stage 5 companies. So I'll walk through each one step by step. So the first C is AI comprehension. This is essentially, how well do our employees understand how to use AI? Right now, what we see is too many employees across every sector are in the dark when it comes to AI. They're not sure how to use the technology. They're not sure about which specific use cases might apply to their specific roles or functions. And this really speaks to the need to invest in comprehension. So within the education sector, we see slightly lower levels of comprehension across the board, but in general, across all organizations, we see this lack of comprehension. So despite, we saw earlier, about half of knowledge workers using the technology, we see within education, just 12% say they actually have a strong understanding of the specific capabilities of generative AI. Just 17% say their organizations have conducted any sort of AI training, and just 9% say their organization has a specific budget for AI professional development resources. And so this desire for more comprehension is really pervasive across every industry right now. Now, why does this matter, right? Why does it matter that we understand how to use the technology? What we see is the more that workers understand how to use the technology and the more they actually use it, they're much more likely to get those productivity gains. So when workers use AI each month, only 39% are reporting that they've experienced productivity gains associated with the technology. When they use AI each week, that jumps to 73%. But when they're using AI each day, when they're truly collaborating with it, when they're truly understanding how to use it as part of their day-to-day work, 89% report productivity gains. So this comprehension fuels the adoption and ends up fueling the productivity gains as well. So that's the first dimension. The second dimension is what we call AI concerns. Now, we all have some level of concern when it comes to AI. In many cases, it's inevitable, and in many cases, it's healthy. But what's interesting is we see across the board that there are different concerns depending on which stage of maturity you're in. And I think this one is pretty important because right now, what we're seeing in the headlines is a lot of narrative around AI job replacement and displacement. And we know that's a real fear, that's a real concern, that's a real reality for some portion of the workforce. But what's not talked about enough is these other fears that we know have been prevalent with every new major technological shift, and we're definitely seeing with AI as well. We see about 1/3 of employees within the education sector. This is higher than what we see in other industries, but still it's a pervasive concern. They're worried about being perceived as lazy for using AI. 29% of workers are worried about feeling like a fraud for using AI at work. And there are these very real human concerns, especially when we look at industries that are so human-centric, where that connection, that relationship building to students, or in the marketing sector, where that human relationship building with customers is so important, we tend to see these concerns increase compared to the benchmark here. Now, we see these concerns across the board, but again, when we look at those stage 1 companies versus those stage 5 companies, we see different levels of concerns. So at that less mature organizational stage, the concerns are much more likely to actually focus on that first C that we talked about. They focus more on the comprehension. There's a high degree of skepticism, right? Employees aren't yet fully using the technology. They're not yet fully getting any benefit from the technology. They're skeptical about the technology. So 55% of knowledge workers in that stage 1 organization say they're skeptical of AI, compared to 25% in those stage 5 companies. Now, as we move to more mature organizations, we see the nature of that concern differ. So at those stage 5 companies, the concern less focuses on comprehension, right? Workers are using the technology, they're understanding how to use it. Right now, when we get to those stage 5 companies, we see concern focus more on responsible AI and ethical AI. Employees are no longer asking, what can AI do for me? They're no longer asking, is AI powerful? They know it's powerful because they've used the technology. Now they start asking questions like, is my personal data secure? Or is AI powered by accurate data? Or is AI biased? And so interpretability, that is, whether we as humans can understand AI recommendations, becomes top of mind at those stage 5 companies. And so it's an interesting shift where less mature organizations, the focus is on comprehension when it comes to concerns. Now we see responsible AI, interpretability of AI come to the surface. The third dimension of AI, and this is the one that I'm personally most passionate about, is AI collaboration. This is, how do we collaborate with AI as new members? Nathan called them new partners. We often refer to them as new teammates within our organizations. Now, there's some fascinating psychology at work here, and we've done several studies where we try to get into some of this psychology. A lot of my academic research focused on this idea of technology frames and how the mental model that we approach technology with really impacts how we adopt the technology. And we're seeing that with AI. So right now, when you ask knowledge workers, what would you compare AI to? Most people, 53%, say it's a tool. They say they compare AI to a tool in their day-to-day work. But there's a small group right now, 9% of employees, but this is growing, that see AI differently. They see AI not as a tool, but they see it as a teammate. Now, what's really fascinating is this group of 9% of employees, they're significantly more likely to report productivity gains associated with the technology. And we've spent quite a bit of time digging into why this is the case. And it's the case because when workers see AI as a tool, they tend to think very narrowly about the technology as a point solution for very specific tasks. When they see AI as a teammate, they're much more likely to think more holistically about the technology. So they're less likely to ask, what can AI do for me? And they're much more likely to ask, what can I do with AI as part of more complex workflows? And that makes them more productive. So we see they report higher productivity gains. They're also more likely to use AI, and they're also more likely to be enthusiastic about using AI at work when they use and adopt this teammate metaphor. And perhaps not surprisingly, we also see in those stage 5 more mature companies, employees are much more likely to say AI is a teammate, is assuming this teammate role compared to a tool. The fourth dimension is what we call AI context. This is essentially, what does the organizational context look like that we're bringing AI into? And in particular, what are the policies, what are the guidelines, and what are the principles that are surrounding the implementation of AI? And here again, we see a lot of opportunity for improvement and a lot of differences as well between those stage 1 companies and the stage 5 companies. And you can see we have two different data points cut by the stages on this slide. We see far too few organizations actually have a policy around AI. And at those stage 1 companies, despite employees using the technology, just 7% of organizations say that their organization actually has a policy for employees to refer to when it comes to AI usage. And then another important component that we see matter for adoption and healthy adoption of AI within organizations is having a set of principles and values associated with the technology. We see at stage 1 companies, only 2% of employees say their organization has those AI principles. It's slightly higher it's significantly higher in stage 5 companies, but still, we think this is an important scaffolding in terms of AI principles for every organization to have. And then finally, the fifth dimension is AI calibration. What we know is it's not enough to just adopt AI. It's not enough to just implement AI. We really need to be thoughtful about how we're measuring the results of these efforts. And there are lots of different ways to measure the results of AI efforts. And there's a big conversation around the ROI of AI happening right now. But one of the simplest and often the most effective way to collect feedback on AI is ask your employees, right? Ask your employees what they're using AI for. Are they getting benefit? What's working? What's not? And here you can see significant differences between those less mature and more mature companies. At the less mature companies, less than 1 in 5 employees say that their organization collects any sort of feedback from employees on generative AI tools. At those stage 5 companies, it jumps to 91%. And so we know it's not just about adopting AI. It's not just about implementing AI. Collecting that feedback is really important. And it's incredibly important to collect it from the people who are using the technology across your organization. So that's what I have. We can send along the report for those who are interested. I have the QR code on the screen here if you'd like to download it as well. Thank you so much.
That's awesome, Rebecca. Thank you. And in the actual conference platform, there's a couple of links to some of the work that Rebecca has done and that Asana has put out. I think maybe a direct link to the report itself. So take a look at that. We're definitely going to have time for a little bit of question and answer at the end of this, but I want to push ahead and have Zoe take over now and share her ideas.
Sure. Yeah, first of all, this was so interesting and fascinating to listen to both of you. And I'm really excited to be here today and to have this discussion. I will get ready and share my screen. Can you guys see it already?
Yep, I see there we go.
Yes. Yeah, so welcome again. Like, I'm Zoe. I'm an assistant professor at the University of St. Gallen. And kind of what makes us human in a tech-driven world is really important to me and very core to me. That's why I'm really excited to be here. So thank you so much. And I will first share with you a bit of a field research that we have been doing around the role of AI. And then I will also go over and kind of transfer these insights that we have generated in the healthcare sector to the community of professionals more in education, so that we can then have a discussion around that. To get us started, so my research, 3 things are really important to me in my research. I look at emotions, I look at collaborative innovation, and I look at technology. And I study collaborative innovation because when we think about technology, it's very rare that just one individual is bringing forward a technology. And I think this really fits well with what Rebecca was saying. It's usually a team of people or communities, when we think about the education sector, that shape how these technologies are designed or even implemented then. And also, I'm really interested, given that technology is becoming smarter and becoming more human-like, so how are the boundaries changing? How are these advancements disrupting how we interact with others? And then a particular angle that I take on these processes is the emotional angle, because what we know from prior research is when we are very upset, there are 2 ways on how we react to it. We can either get paralyzed and stop doing what we do, or we can get energized by negative emotions and innovate better. And kind of with my research, I want to understand how these emotions can be leveraged. And similar to what we already discussed, is that it's very important for me to work closely with real organizations, so that we kind of really develop these insights bottom up. So I worked with pharmaceutical companies, I worked with medical teams, but also with startup teams to get their perspectives. And I'm really interested, as I said, so how can you leverage negative emotions to see them as a motor of innovation and thereby create synergistic relationships between technologies and humans? And with this, I want to share with you a study that I've done with several colleagues on the use of Gen AI for in-basket messages. So a lot of my research at the moment is in the healthcare sector. And there I studied teams. And in this particular setting, we looked at how, for example, providers, they have to deal with a lot of in-basket messages from the patients. So they get a lot of incoming messages. And actually, each additional message can take them around 2 minutes of extra work. And oftentimes, they actually spend this time in their pajamas after work answering these messages. And we were thinking, okay, how can we help these people? How can we support them to get less of this burden on their shoulder? And kind of also to avoid that people burn out. I think we touched upon it. It's really important for us to understand how can this technology actually support well-being instead of being a burden for us. So we were looking at how can Gen AI help to streamline the workflows and help drafting messages back to the patients, and thereby hopefully alleviate burnout on the physician side, who are supposed to answer these messages. So the research question that we were tackling was, can generative AI chatbots add patient healthcare professionals communication by creating high-quality draft responses to patient requests? And what we did is that we collaborated with 16 providers, and they reviewed in total 344 messages. And part of these messages, they were generated by Gen AI. and the other part was drafted by physicians. And what we found is that it was really important for us to kind of look at different dimensions on how they would rate these messages coming from the humans and from the technology. And kind of the criteria that we looked at was information content quality, communication quality, willingness to use a draft or discard it. And we also looked at empathy, personalization, and professionalism of responses. And what we found is like generally both generated responses and also provider responses were rated favorably. What was interesting is that Gen AI responses were rated higher for communication style than provider responses, but were similar to provider messages on information quality and the usable draft of the portion. And one thing I really want to point out, and what fits nicely with the theme that we are discussing today when we think about the human aspects of these relationships, is that we found that the Gen AI responses that were considered usable were considered as more empathetic than the provider responses. And this is probably attributable, because we were wondering, this was surprising to us, that actually there was more positive language in the draft generated by AI. It was also formulated more subjectively, and it was longer and more linguistically complex. So people felt heard by these long messages and felt like, yeah, it was taken seriously and it was helpful, and they felt there was, yeah, relationally, they really appreciated it. But what does it mean? So this means that Gen AI has the potential to improve workers' well-being and productivity, because we found they were open to use the draft. And also it could elevate and improve the patient-provider communication through this perceived empathy. At the same time, we also consider the potential unintended consequences. When we think about having more complex languages, this could also increase inequalities, because it might not be understandable to all patients who receive these messages. So also thinking about what this means then maybe for a large population and from an equity perspective. And transferring this to the education sector and also the communities of learning, this could mean that theoretically AI could support, and I think this is also what we discussed at the beginning, it can support student well-being and productivity. It can also help the communication between student and teachers. But at the same time, we have to be careful when we implement these technologies, because maybe they might also be only usable for some of the students that we have that are really tech savvy, that naturally flow with these technologies, but they might not be accessible to everybody. So I'm really curious also to discuss with you guys, so how can we make sure that these really engaging and enriching relationship between student and teachers are fostered across a diverse cohort of students? And with this, I also want to go over and go a bit deeper into the core topic of this conference, the need to belong. So I went back and was reflecting, like, what does it mean and how is it described in current research? And it is described as a pervasive human drive to form positive and close relationships with others, which are critical for mental and physical well-being. And letting this sink in, and then thinking about technology and how it's introduced, this really raises a question, like, what will happen when AI is joining the classroom, maybe also in different forms? Like now, it can be, of course, a robot also joining maybe in at some point. Like, what does it mean for our sense of belonging and our relationship with among students, but also students with teachers, and also the students with potential robots that might join the classrooms at some point? And I think one thing that I found really eye-opening is also a quote from an interview that I recently read from, it's a quote from Ethan Mollick, where he said, "AI is a software, but because of how it's built, it is much more working with a person than working with a tool. And when we talk about it this way, I almost feel kind of bad because there's a danger in building a relationship with a system that is purely artificial. And I think this raises an important point. At this stage, AI is not fully human. And how will this difference affect how we relate to it? And with this, I want to kind of share a few questions that I'm currently thinking about is like, when AI can support a variety of learning tasks, how will it change the human-human relationship that we form in the classroom? And how can educators support students to develop healthy relationships with AI, where students proactively use AI, but at the same time also remain reflective in their own capabilities? And also, how can Gen AI address the emotional needs of students and maybe improve the relationship and their experience so that they learn effectively? And with this, I want to thank you for your attention. I'm really excited for exchanging further thoughts and for the questions.
Thank you so much, Zoe. This is so provocative. Both of you, Rebecca, Zoe, so many ideas. And I think one of the things we're wrestling with, we're not going to answer it today. One of the things we're wrestling with is how do we apply that in the classroom, in higher ed organizations? And, I feel like, again, this is nothing we're going to answer. And there's not one answer. I mean, Rebecca, you were pointing to kind of a continuum, and it seems like higher education organizations are not alone in being slow to adapt, slow to onboard to this, slow to comprehensively embrace it. And I think maybe that points to some of what Zoe is kind of questioning and thinking about. How do we do this, and what's the upshot for it? And again, I don't know if I have a direct question for you all in there, but I'm sort of trying to wrestle with, Rebecca, one of the C's, the concerns. If you look at the chat for this presentation right now, one of the concerns we have as educators is that students are using AI to complete coursework. Where is the knowledge acquisition? And tying that to, Zoe, some of the things you were sharing, I love the idea of providers looking at AI generated notes and then kind of deciding, okay, this can go, this can go. I wake up every day to at least 5 or 6 emails from students. What if AI had already generated those responses and my role was not to type the response, but to validate that it was a good response that I wanted to send, and then just hit send? So, I mean, so somewhere in there, I guess I'm kind of wondering, where do we find that ground between hanging on to what makes us human, forging these human connections with students, ensuring that they're seen and heard, but also engaged in the process? I don't know. I mean, Rebecca, maybe you could kick us off with a thought on that, and then.
Sure. I think it's immensely challenging. I think one of the things we think about a lot, and we just actually published a report last week that focuses on just how much of our time is spent on busy work. As knowledge workers right now, it's more than 50% of our time spent on this busy work, scheduling meetings, coordinating work, repeating workflows, duplicating tasks, all of the things that we as humans shouldn't really be doing and aren't uniquely suited to do. And I think that might be a helpful distinction to delineate the unique value propositions of AI, right? It's automating those mundane tasks. It's taking off things from our plate that we as humans aren't uniquely suited to do. And that frees up more of our time for strategic thinking, for creative thinking, for building relationships with one another, with students, with, customers and other sectors. And I think we need to, that's why the organizational context dimension is so important as well, because having those principles and values around every organization, every teacher, every classroom, there should be some sort of a position on what is the role of AI. And in many cases, it's helpful to think about AI is in service of humans. It's really aimed at augmenting intelligence. I studied a company for many years that decided to ban the term artificial intelligence because it conveys this sort of threat and it's at odds with human intelligence, and they replaced it with augmented intelligence. Other companies use amplified intelligence. And I think a lot of this comes back to having a strong opinion on the role of AI and making sure that, AI is in service of humans and amplifying that human potential that we know right now AI can't replicate.
Wow. Yeah, that's fascinating. I think I also agree that it's like there's so much potential in kind of improving the relationship and freeing up time to really focus on the things that matter and the creative tasks and some of these more complex and enriching aspects. And at the same time, I think a key aspect is also when we think about students and the way that the brain develops and these early stages of when you learn, is that you kind of have a variety of skills, and also that you are not only capable of doing some things with a technology. So when we think about, I think even when I went to school, we had a calculator, and there are some tasks I wasn't allowed to use my calculator. I could just use my head. And of course, back then we could also just calculator and say, okay, we have this calculator. We will always have calculators. So why should children learn this complex thing if they don't need it? But there might be other aspects in our life where we need these abilities. And I think this is the same for AI technologies. I think that we need to be careful that we don't unlearn skills that might also be linked to creative, like even maybe some routine tasks are critical for me to come up with creative thoughts. And I think this, for me, I'm all for experimentation. So I'm all for, let's use the technology, let's leverage, let's try. But then also sometimes let's take a step back and do it without the technology again to compare. And maybe also then as a student reflect on how is this different? What are the different skills that I gained from it? So that we don't become codependent in a way, because we always have this thinking, okay, yeah, it's great, but will we always stay reflective as a society, as a community of educators or learners, that this is a good direction for us? And what are the short versus long-term consequences? So there might be short-term benefits, but what will this do to us in 50 years, in 80 years, to us as humans? Like, these are really philosophical questions, but these are things that I'm really curious about, and I think we need to discuss and think about and reflect. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's philosophical, it's existential in a way,
Yeah.
but it happens every day. I mean, we're sitting here working with students, or providers are working with patients, or other organizations are working with their clients. I mean, this is something that seems really immediate. And I guess, I started off by saying I don't think we should ban AI in the classroom, but maybe we should. Like, I feel like I'm allowed to consider that sliding scale. Rebecca, I know some of your work has talked about the idea of these guardrails that organizations will say, okay, you can use AI for these tasks, but not these. University of Arizona, as an organization, we have principles, I would suggest, but not direct policy yet on AI use in the classroom. And, to Zoe's point, I teach first year writing. I feel like everyone feels like they're the most under threat, but I feel like I'm one of the most under threat people here, because I'm dealing with hundreds and hundreds of student essays every week that may or may not be fully written by AI or partnered with AI. I guess I'm just wondering, how do I reconcile my desire to experiment, my desire to explore, my desire to impart instruction about an important workplace skill to students, while also kind of feeling like I shouldn't let them use this in my class?
It's hard. I think transparency is underrated in this age of AI reskilling and upskilling, in the sense of, I think I've seen really effective outcomes when employees and especially leaders, whether you're in a classroom or in any other organization, people are fixated on what leaders do. And I think the more that leaders can be transparent about when they themselves are using AI and share those success cases as well as the failures, we know that that psychologically safe environment is really important too. And I think it's a healthy practice for every leader, whether it's, in a weekly memo or a weekly email to students to say, hey, here's how I have experimented with AI this week. Here's what I was concerned about. Here's what surprised me. Here's what was unexpected. Here's what I'll do in the future. Here's what I won't do in the future. I think it's that learning culture and the culture of experimentation that needs to be a daily affair, because students will watch very closely and they'll exemplify some of those great practices as well and see that space to experiment in a safe and responsible and hopefully generative way as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I couldn't agree more with the transparency aspect and also with the experimentation. I think we need to do that. I think we are all on the same page here, that kind of using it, learning it, because when you are not learning how to interact with it and not sharing best practice, and I think this comes from all sides. So both the students could learn from each other what are good practices, and then from the teacher also learning kind of best practices. So I think this is like a learning community on best practices. So, and maybe to add, I think I would also say kind of having scenarios in the like different tasks maybe for students. This is sometimes what I do. I teach methods and then I experiment with AI to analyze some parts of, I use qualitative methods of a transcript and then the own interpretation and kind of map these. And of course, it's not transferable to all contexts, but as an educator, maybe thinking about, because I think just mentioning the ethical consequences and not feeling or experiencing it in a way, it's very different. As we know from learning, it's very different when somebody says, oh, it's so dangerous, here are these rules. But when you experience it yourself, I think when we create and become creative together on how we can create the scenarios that become something that's more comprehensive and more that people can feel it and students can feel it, I think then we hopefully have a chance to develop a mindset that's innovative, experimentative, that people are not shying away from technology while remaining reflective and not engaging in blind trust, or also putting responsibility just out to an external technology. I think this also is key.
I think that idea of being sort of fearless in your thinking, approaching a new technology, a new topic, a new course that you've never taken before, approaching that openly, I think is something that we all want to instill in our students. The best way to do that while also conveying the ethics of this particular tool, I think that's something that's still obviously up for debate. Rebecca, your work is talking a lot about how organizations are having a really hard time bringing this into the light. People are using AI, but they're not talking about it. And that transparency piece then is, of course, key, but so much hangs on that, especially if I can generalize with knowledge workers. I mean, when I got hired as a professor, my brain was what was hired, my ability to do these things. And if I've got a little buddy who does those things for me, it becomes really difficult to talk about that. And so, as much as I'm interested in the student aspect of this, how we ensure that students are learning the right skills long term, I'm really interested in what this means for me as a professor, for us as researchers and writers and thinkers, and how do we partner with it in a way that will inspire, will tap into this enhanced productivity, but will also leverage this new technology. And I keep coming back to, I feel like we're not there yet. I feel like we just don't know yet. And is that okay? Like, I mean, obviously we all want answers. We want to know what's going on. We want to rush in. Is it okay that we just don't know yet?
I think it's okay. I think it's also inevitable that we don't know yet. And I think one of the most durable skills, in my opinion, for, teachers, students, for anyone is learning and having a bias toward learning the technology. A couple people have said pretty publicly that AI is at the worst it will ever be right now compared to the future in the future, and the more we can.
I think Rebecca just slowed down and
Yeah, I wasn't sure. It's just
jammed. Zoe, do you want to jump in? Rebecca, if you can hear us or unpause, come back. But Zoe, I mean, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I feel like what you also were describing is like this threat, this identity threat, and this like reconfiguration of what our tasks are, what our skills are, what's really the unique value that we bring in our professions. And I would agree with what you said that it's like we don't know yet. And I think we have to accept that we don't know everything, but we shouldn't reflect upon what this means to us like on a daily basis, because the technology will keep emerging. And I think this is a continuous task for us as a collective to redesign our jobs, redesign our identity and what it means. And I think at the same time, we need to also reflect upon what motivates us to be in the roles that we are, so that we don't lose. Because you were talking about this engaged relationship. I think this will only happen if teachers feel that the core values that they hold, that they are mirrored in their profession in a way. And if we feel like these are not mirrored, then we have to think like, how can we design a classroom where these are mirrored? And maybe we have to also adapt some. But I think what I would also hope for is that we, as a community, we don't lose the values that we all value in a way, like, and that are important to us, just because we get excited by one thing or another. Oh, Rebecca's back.
I apologize. My internet cut out.
That's okay. Zoe picked up the baton and ran forward, but obviously, if you want to wrap up or you remember where you were, jump in.
Just the importance of learning and consistently. These models change so quickly. We're going to have a lot of different verticalized use cases of AI too. There's going to be education specific generative AI and other AI tools. And I think it's our responsibility really as humans to learn as much as we can and experiment with technology, even if it's somewhat flawed, because it's going to improve, it's going to get better. And the more we can also understand how the technology is evolving, I think the more we can understand how we should evolve with it as well.
Yeah, I mean, and I think what you're both speaking to is this idea that we're learning something, whether we use the thing we have trained on. Like I ride a bike, but it doesn't have training wheels, but that's how I learned. And I feel like this technology now, it is the worst it's ever going to be. It's only going to get better. But if we don't engage with it, if we don't learn on it, then when the next generation comes out, one of the talking robots from Zoe's presentation, then we suddenly are really flummoxed. We don't know how to react. We don't know how to engage. And my dad famously retired when they put a computer on his desk, didn't want to learn it, but then had to spend, another 40 years living in a world where computers dominated everything. So I feel like, we talk about banning or not banning, we talk about integrating in the classroom, integrating in our work lives. But I do feel like a lot of what you're sharing here today points us toward a path where we need to at least be reflecting on this, thinking about it mindfully, integrating it where possible. And Zoe, something you said, this idea that we sort of lean into those things that are core to who we are. I posited earlier the idea that AI would write my responses to students for me from my email inbox. But man, I love doing that. That's one of the things that really gets me excited is connecting to my students. Do I want to give that up? AI can give feedback on essays. Okay, I don't always like grading essays, but it's really important to what I do and who I am, so I don't want to give that up either. And just to say that I think all of us kind of have to have that conversation in terms of productivity. You know,
Mhm.
what are those things that make us who we are, that we bring to the table that are uniquely human,
Mhm.
that are us? And
Mhm.
what are those things that really is, Rebecca, you use the term like that busy work, that I think of it as just
Mhm.
like slush every day. You know, my student emails are important, but the other 30 emails I get every morning, not always necessarily. Sorry if you were one of the ones who sent me an email, but the student ones are more important. The other ones I can kind of push to the side. And so, yeah, I think just figuring that out, and getting to that point where we understand it. And it's really comforting to hear from both of you that and you both are researchers who work with this every day with tons of organizations, tons of people, and you're saying, yeah, it's okay that you don't know. It's okay that you haven't figured it out. A lot of anxiety, a lot of uncertainty, and that's okay.
Yeah, and maybe also not losing, like anxiety can also be protective in a way. I think anxiety shouldn't be blocking. So this is like, oh, what Rebecca said, we should like not, or like we all said it, like we shouldn't be not engaging with it. But I think also losing the anxiety could be risky with time. When we think about like maybe 10 or 20 years from now, there might be some aspects. I think we should be forgiving to flaws and help the technologies learn so that they get better. But from time to time, there might be something that changes in the environment, like something may change and the technology may change, it might not fit the context. And then, yeah, using our gut sense and our anxiety to kind of take a back, I think reframing how we see anxiety around it. It's a compass. It helps us to make these better and to integrate them in a way that they benefit society. I think that's also important.
Yeah, we ran a study a few months
Okay.
ago where we looked at, is it possible to convert someone from an AI skeptic to what we call an
Mm.
AI enthusiast? So is it possible to sort of change their mindset around AI inspired? We worked with folks from Carol Dweck's lab at Stanford who did all the great work on mindset. And essentially what we found is if you try to encourage a skeptic that AI is all rosy and all positive, it doesn't work. What does work is acknowledging the skepticism and pairing that with a real discussion on here's where AI can help versus here's where humans are uniquely suited to weigh in and contribute. And I think like we need to be acknowledging the skepticism, acknowledging the anxiety, because that will actually empower more of an enthusiastic view of the technology. Because it's the reality. It's the reality that AI is fundamentally flawed, and we need to acknowledge that to sort of move forward.
That's great. And that I think brings us to a good place to sort of wrap up today. Again, no answers, lots of better framed questions, lots of provocations, and just a spirit of growth and development. I can't tell you how grateful I am, Zoe and Rebecca, to have you joining us today to help kick off day 2 of our conference. There are so many presentations coming up today, some of which are on this exact same topic. So I really hope that you'll those of you who are here, you'll go click through and join in on some of the great sessions that are coming up later. And yeah, I can't say it enough. Really, really grateful you guys were here. I know, Haley, you've got some things you want to share.
Yes, thank you so much. I echo Nate's appreciation for you both being here. I learned a lot today about the intersection of AI and belonging, and definitely have some takeaways. So thanks again. And everyone joining us today, thank you all for your time this morning. We hope you have a wonderful day 2 for TLC. And then please plan on joining us at the end of the day at 2 o'clock Pacific time. Dr. Lauren Scharf, who is the Director of Scholarship and Teaching and Learning at the United States Air Force Academy, will be sharing her perspectives on the scholarship of teaching and learning at her session titled Finding Where You Fit, Scholarship of Teaching and Learning. And again, that's at 2 o'clock Pacific time. Everyone have a productive day filled with discourse and learning. Thank you all for being here.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.